Hi guys, this is Dan. Welcome back to my channel. In 2024, I embarked a very long, massive journey. By the end of the year, I was able to finish a very popular, very highly rated fantasy series, The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. So in today's video, I would like to introduce this brilliant fantasy series to you guys without much spoilers, telling you what you're gonna expect. And then I will move on to talk about the inspiration behind this series, what's so good about the Dandelion Dynasty, or maybe why this series may not appeal to everyone. So the very first question you may have is, what is the Dandelion Dynasty? The Dandelion Dynasty is an Asian-inspired historical fantasy written by Ken Liu that got 4 books in this series. The Grace of Kings, The Wall of Storms, The Fifth Throne, and The Speaking Bones. Then in this series, we will jump into a fantasy world called Dara, which is inspired by East Asian culture and got a very rich history and mythology. In the very beginning of the story, Emperor Mapiteri united and established the Sino Empire. But with him getting old and his health is going downhill, the desertification of his ruling grows, setting the stage for rebellion. In the core of this rebellion, we will follow 2 main characters, a very resourceful and charming bandit called Kuni, and an ambitious noble warrior called Mata. They are both very talented and slowly rise to power in this very chaotic world. So in the first book, we would explore this complex relationship with this brotherhood and how these 2 characters gonna achieve their goals to overthrow the Sino Empire. For the rest of the series, we will actually move on to an external threat, an invasion from a foreign race called the Liu. So we will see how the survivor of the first book gonna defend their home with whatever they can find. Also from the second book onwards, the focus is more on the next generation of our previous characters. I would say this is more significant in the 3rd and 4th book, how they gonna preserve the legacy of the last generation. Alongside with the plot, we will also have discussion about clash of cultures and ideological difference. Throughout these 4 books, you will expect a very rich world building, very complex characters, political interests, and lots of epic battles. After completing the Dandelion Dynasty, my overall comment would be I understand the ambition of the author of Ken Liu, and I think Ken Liu is a great storyteller. But before talking about how great this series is gonna be like, I wanna first talk about the inspiration behind the Dandelion Dynasty first. The Dandelion Dynasty, I would say, is based on 2 historical Chinese dynasties. The first one is the end of the Qing Dynasty, and the second one is the start of the Han Dynasty. Previously, I have actually made a video about all the historical references that you can find in the first book, The Grace of Kings. So if you want a more deep down discussion about this, you may want to check that video out. Here, I will just mention it very briefly. Qing Dynasty is established by Qin Shi Huang in 221 BC. You can tell Qin Shi Huang is the inspiration of the Emperor Mapiteri in the Dandelion Dynasty. What Mapiteri has done in the story, you can actually find them in Chinese history. His death marks the end of his oppressive rule. As with some very selfish officials in this empire, many who was not happy with the ruling of the Qing Emperor actually come out and rebel. There were 2 rising forces here. The first one is Liu Ban, which is the inspiration of Kuni, and then we have Xian Yu, who Mata is based on. There are many epic battles or moments in the story that are actually inspired by the historical events between them. With how the first book ends, which I won't talk about it here because I want you guys to find out the answer. In history, it marks the start of the Han Dynasty in 202 BC. But from this point onwards, I wouldn't say Ken Liu stick with the sequence of the historical events very tightly. To avoid any possible spoilers, let's say the kids of our last generation The fate, the personality, the action of some of the characters, they are mostly accurate. They have actually happened in history. But the most important plot for the rest of the series, the invasion of the Liu, I couldn't really pinpoint any characters or events that are actually based on history. Or even later, when the plot expands further, I couldn't find any historical basis. Liu Chu in the story is like a tribe living in a foreign land who got their own way of living, which is so different from the people in Dara. With all the evidence I can gather in the story and then matching them to history, I would say the inspiration of the Liu Chu is Xiongnu in Chinese history. To be very brief here, Xiongnu were a tribal confederation of nomadic people who, according to ancient Chinese sources, inhabit the eastern Eurasian steppe from the 3rd century BC to the last 1st century AD. If you imagine the territory these Xiongnu were occupying in the past, they are actually mostly around Mongolia as in now. Tamriel Roten, the leader of the Liu Chu, is actually based on Mongdu Chenyu. Again, I wouldn't go into every details as in what happened in the book, but you can find what Tamriel has done in the book in real life. But if we are looking at everything that has happened in the last 3 books, I would say most of them is actually fictional. Here I will just try to drop some hints of what I'm going to talk about. If you have completed the series, you will have guessed which characters or what things I am actually referring to. Like the very major plot in the second half of the 3rd book, what's gonna happen to the prince in the 4th book? Or maybe what the princess has gone through in the 3rd and the 4th book and her very first romantic encounter, or the ending of the Empress. All these are fictional. Nothing like this has happened in history. Or maybe it is like a very minor thing that has happened in history, but then Ken Liu brought it up and expanded furthermore in the plot of the Dandelion Dynasty. This lack of historical references for the rest of the series is actually quite different from the 1st book, because you can tell already I have made a video about all the historical references that you can find in The Grace of Kings. But then the reason why I stopped doing it for the rest of the series is only because I couldn't really find them. That's why I incorporate what I want to talk about in here, rather than doing separate videos for the 3 books. At this moment, I think most of you are gonna have some more knowledge or what you're gonna expect from the Dandelion Dynasty. Finally, I can share my thoughts about this whole series, and I think it would be better to start with the positives. Firstly, I would say Ken Liu is a master of crafting a brand new fantasy world, and he is a great storyteller. To craft this world of Dara from scratch, Ken Liu is really ambitious and put a lot of efforts in it. From the characters, the history, myth, politics, biology, chemistry, engineering, physics, agriculture, philosophy, linguistics, astronomy, psychology, military, anything you can name that is needed in a fantasy world, Ken Liu can provide a very detailed explanation behind them. Honestly, I am totally impressed by his effort, and I don't think I have come across something like this before. You can really tell how much effort and thoughts has put to the world building of the Dandelion Dynasty. The plot itself is also very well thought out. All the decisions, all the actions, all the progress, all the development, all the twists are just so on point and so captivating. You will never be certain about the outcome because of all the twists, or maybe there are some questions we as the readers have along the way that we are so eager to find out the answers. I would just say the plot and the world building are just so perfect, basically. Another element that makes the Dandelion Dynasty so special is the silk pun technology. It is like Ken Liu's approach to modern technology but set in a fantasy world that is based on East Asian culture. It is different from steampunk technology because the materials used here are more organic. Our characters would use paper, bamboo, or even animal organs. Our characters would observe certain phenomena in the nature and then come up with an invention that is based on them with the explanation of modern scientific and engineering theories, which is impressive. It is just so smart and different because, to be fair, there is not too much fantasy elements in the Dandelion Dynasty. This steampunk technology, in a sense, is quite relatable, is quite realistic, because all the inventions we will come across, we will see them in our modern days. It is not a spoiler because you can find them on the covers of the books. There's gonna be submarines, there's gonna be aircrafts in the story, and we will witness the constructions of these inventions. But it is in a fictional world. I was really surprised to see such a hard work in a fictional world. The characters would then apply this steampunk technology in the battle. We all know all the great inventions would be invented during the wartime, sadly. So it is quite fascinating to see how our characters gonna use these inventions in the battles to turn the tide with these surprises. I would also say Ken Liu is a genius in writing action and battle scenes. They are just so immersive. I guess what makes them special here is the battles usually divided into several waves. Both sides fighting will pull whatever they can to win the war, so we will never be certain how the battle gonna end or what cost our characters have to pay. They may have different tactics, they may have different approaches, different formation to maximize their advantages, or maybe there are some unexpected twists. So as the reader, we will never know the outcome of these battles, and the only way to find out is to finish the book. The last thing Ken Liu has planned very well is the character work. It is just so exceptional. From the beginning of the first book to the ending of the fourth book, we will follow a huge cast of characters, or even in every book, Ken Liu would introduce a new group of characters. So you can already imagine how many storylines we're gonna come across, but don't worry, I think every character is just so vivid and they are like having soul and blood. There are no characters gonna fade in the background because every single one of them will got a storyline, and I mean we will know everything they have done since their childhood, or even they got their own moment to shine. So it is so fruitful to see how much our characters have grown in the series, how much joy or tears us the readers has to go through as well. Or maybe some of them is so mysterious we need to find out the secrets of them. Even for the villains, they got their own beliefs, their own reasons of why they act like this. Or maybe even for the real villains, they are just so consistent in the story. My favorite is definitely Jia. I was impressed by Nodemi and I laugh a lot with Sato. I will let you guys to find out what happened to them. So it is quite rare to see a fantasy series can have so many well-written, complex characters. I have been praising Ken Liu and the Dandelion Dynasty in the last maybe 10 minutes. Would I say it is a 5-star series? My answer is nearly there. It is actually nearly there. To very quickly summarize what I'm going to talk about, I would just say this series is not for everyone. After finishing the first book, I made this comment already. The Grace of Kings is just so dry. After completing the second, third, and the fourth book, this does not change. I would even say this is the biggest weakness of the Dandelion Dynasty. Like I said, Ken Liu is such a genius to construct a fantasy world from scratch. He will consider all the elements that has to be included and explain them to the readers. So let's say in the story, when our characters are talking about this particular philosopher, Ken Liu would explain what this philosophy is actually about or what is it advocating to the readers. Or maybe when we come up with an invention by observing the nature, he would actually talk through every step to construct this brand new invention and explain all the principles behind. Or sometimes we need to survive in the wild nature, what we need to do to keep us safe. As a reader, I totally appreciate how much Ken Liu wanted to incorporate to his fantasy world, but at the same time, as a reader, I do have a question. Do we need every single detail in this fantasy series? The pacing of the Dandelion Dynasty is not fast already. Other than the first book or the fourth book, the pacing for the rest is significantly slower. It is like we are aware there are certain undercurrents. There are some build-up to certain things that might happen in the future. Or even in the third book, the plot barely moved forward. And when the plot expands, we will definitely get more storylines. But not all of them are happening in a close proximity. So from chapter to chapter, we may be jumping from here and there in this world of Dara. So sometimes I wouldn't say I was bored, but I did hope that things can be pushed slightly more, if you know what I mean. Sometimes I feel like we are just having so many details for just one particular thing. They are like little pebbles that we might not need on this road of journey. Or even when we finally reach the climax, the battles or the confrontation we have been anticipating. Like I said, this kind of conflicts usually divided into several waves. The reason is that Ken Liu want to jump in and explain to the readers about how our characters can come up with this idea, how they can bring up these surprises to the battles. But usually the length of these flashbacks are exactly the same, if not longer, than the battle itself. So us, the readers, will be so eager to find out how our characters are doing. We are so curious about the outcome of this battle. But sorry, Ken Liu has to jump in and give us some explanation first. What makes it worse is these battles are obviously so intense, but then the flashbacks is like having a lesson about science and engineering theories. So it is a bit info dumpy and takes the readers away from what is happening now. This was like testing my patience because I was having so many questions in my mind and I was so eager to find out the answer, but all of a sudden I got a lecture about chemistry, about biology. At one point, I lost control and tried to search what's going to happen after the battle by Google. Luckily, there's no answer, so there's no spoiler. The Dandelion Dynasty is a masterpiece of epic fantasy, blending history, mythology, imagination in a unique, unforgettable series. Ken Liu's ambition and storytelling powers shine through every page, from the intricate world building to the rich character art and the innovative silpunk technology. But this series does require patience and a willingness to immerse yourself to this very detailed world. If you are a fan of slow burn plot, very complex characters, and thought-provoking themes, this series does definitely worth your time. But if you prefer a fast-paced fantasy or find heavy exposition tedious, this may not be a best fit. So this is pretty much what I want to say about the Dandelion Dynasty. It is quite rare for me to share my thoughts of one particular fantasy series. So if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to my channel Dynasty so you won't miss anything from me. I'll see you all real soon. Goodbye.